I've been living in Moscow for 8 years, and I'm constantly getting asked by my viewers about things they should see when they come to visit Moscow. While the normal tourists flock to Red Square, the Kremlin, and Gorky Park, the city is actually brimming with hidden gems. And in this video, I'm going to show you 8 of them. These are Moscow's best kept secrets, places that reveal a different side, a quieter side, and often more charming side of the Russian capital. So whether you're a history buff, a nature lover, or simply looking for something a bit more off the beaten path, these spots will show you a side of Moscow that even many locals don't know about. So, let's go. There aren't many places in Moscow, in central Moscow, where you just don't feel like you're in a big city. And for me, this is one of them. This is Krutitsky. It's a compound hosting a number of churches, with the oldest parts dating back to the 13th or 14th century. But for me, it's not the churches that are exceptional. I've been to hundreds of churches in Russia, and there are so many churches that look just like this church behind me around the country. It's the entire ensemble as a whole, especially this red brick Metropolitan's chamber on my right and the gates just behind me. Because you know what, one of the things I love about Moscow is that it's constantly evolving, improving, modernizing, expanding. So it's really quite striking to have these old buildings with so much history still surviving, especially in this area. It's very central, and just over there, I'll show you in a second, there are so many ugly Soviet-style housing blocks and cheap-looking 2000s, 2010s office blocks. So having this so close is a great contrast, which is one of the reasons I love Moscow so much. Although admittedly, January isn't the best time to come here, especially if there's no snow. It's very rainy and grey at the moment. There's ice melting on the floor. It's actually very British weather today. But I'll overlay some photos right now from the summer so you can see just how beautiful this place is at a better time of the year. It's also really beautiful in the height of winter where there's a ton of snow. It's a very magical place here, and I highly recommend coming here if you're coming to Moscow. So look, here behind me you see the church. This is the entrance to that compound, and if I do a quick 180, totally different architecture. That's what I mean. It's the contrast around here which is so striking to me. Next on the list is a great spot if you want some nature right inside the city. Moscow is full of parks, famous parks, most notably Gorky Park, all of which are worth visiting. However, this place, the Apothecary Garden, is one of my favourites. And because of its location, outside of the garden ring that circles the very centre of Moscow, it's not so popular with tourists. Unlike the previous spot I showed you, it's another hidden gem in the true sense of hidden, because it's very hard to stumble upon this garden if you're not actively looking for it. In fact, it's totally surrounded by apartment blocks, and you'd never look behind them. It was founded in the early 18th century by Peter the Great, and today it's actually a part of Moscow State University, but remains open to the general public. Admittedly, this place is nicest in the spring and the summer, but because you have to pay to enter, it has things to see all year round. In the winter, like now, the most popular attraction inside the garden obviously isn't the trees or the flowers, but it's the greenhouses, which are very well kept and have plants from all over the world. And one of the reasons it is so well kept is because you have to pay to get in. Today I paid 300 rubles. That's the weekday rate. That's like $3. So it's super cheap for to come into a very quiet park. And this park has exhibitions all year round. Like in the spring, it has the Tulip Festival. In the winter, it's focused on tropical plants. So it's like a very small, very peaceful escape in the heart of Moscow, and you feel like you've left the bustling streets behind. In fact, there's a main road there, but here it's super quiet, and all you can hear are the birds. If you come to Moscow and you find that unfortunately you're here on a rainy day, I've got a great hidden gem recommendation for you right here. This museum is one of the quirkiest places in Moscow and an absolute must visit if you're interested in a bit of Soviet nostalgia on your trip to Moscow, or maybe you're just looking for something completely different. Its name is the Museum of Soviet Arcade Machines, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a collection of vintage arcade machines from throughout the Soviet era. You can actually play on the machines, and because they're so old, they're all mechanical, and they operate with old Soviet coins that you're given when you buy a ticket. Actually, you get given them in a little matchbox. As well as the arcade machines, the museum also has fully embraced the Soviet feel by selling popular Soviet drinks and snacks. I highly recommend visiting here in the center of Moscow. Hidden in the shadows of Moscow city is this tranquil little oasis, the Nizhny Krasnogvardeyski Pond. It's probably my favorite little park in the whole of Moscow. Admittedly, it doesn't look so great on a day like today. It's horrible weather, there's no snow, there's no sun, but because of the view of the skyscrapers, this has become a very popular spot for photo shoots, both in the summer and the winter. And if you head in that direction towards the water, there's also an ice rink. And if you head north across the road over there, it's actually a very nice, a much bigger park, a lovely local place. A place I'd recommend you go for a walk if you come visit Moscow, especially if you come to visit Moscow city, which you probably will, and you'd like to go for a walk away from the huge crowds in the likes of Gorky Park. If you come to this place, take a photo with the background of Moscow city, head north past the ponds. It's a really beautiful area. Highly recommend it as a hidden gem in Moscow. If you're in the north of Moscow and want a nice place to go and relax, I highly recommend coming here. This is Aqueduct Park, and this behind me is the Rostokino Aqueduct, which is unfortunately not very well known. The aqueduct is also known as the Miliony Bridge. As you can see, it also acts as a bridge, and it was built in the 18th century during the reign of Catherine the Great. It's a big part of Moscow's history of water supply, and it is an impressive piece of engineering. Today, this is just a beautiful spot for a walk. It's located, like I said, in the north, just off Sokolniki Park, which is just in that direction, and it stretches over a river, of course, right here, the Yauza River. And this place is particularly stunning in autumn when the leaves are changing colour, or in the winter after fresh snowfall. But unfortunately today it is winter, it's January, but it's bloody cold and there is zero snow anywhere. So I really can't recommend the park in these circumstances, but in other circumstances absolutely I would, especially as well when most tourists come to Moscow, which is the summer. This place really is a peaceful escape from Moscow's crazy hustle and bustle. And all around the park you can get a great view of the aqueduct, so it's well worth coming. It's definitely not one of the most famous landmarks in Moscow, but in my opinion it's well worthy of a spot on my hidden gem list. And something else to note about this park is that you have a really cool view of one of Moscow's most famous socialist realist statues, the Worker and the Kolkhoz Woman, built for the 1937 World's Fair in Paris. Moscow is full of churches and monasteries, and if you come to visit, you'll no doubt see lots of them, and you might even go inside a few of the most famous ones. I wanted to include at least one on this list, but I didn't want it to be a very famous one. After all, this is a hidden gems video. So I came here off Petrovka Street, right in the very heart of Moscow. This is Vysoka Petrovsky Monastery, and I chose this as a hidden gem because I've been here in Moscow for 8 years, and I've walked past those walls behind me there hundreds of times, but I only came inside the walls for the very first time last year. This monastery is particularly interesting because of just how quiet it is, despite being just a 5-minute walk in that direction from Tverskaya Street, the busiest street through the center of Moscow. In the courtyard here, there are 5 churches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, including this one here, which is the Church of St. Peter, which was built by an Italian architect in the 16th century. And this is the entrance here to the Church of St. Sergius, which is one of those classic red and white Narishkin Baroque buildings, a uniquely Russian architectural style. This whole area actually remains an active monastery, but it's also open for visitors who want to pop in. So if you're walking through the center of the city, actually the Kremlin is just there. You want some peace and quiet, it's worth coming inside these court walls, sitting down, having a bit of relax, and enjoying some classic Russian architecture. This is one of the most unique neighborhoods in Moscow, the Sokol Artists Village, with no tower blocks, just small houses. When you're in Moscow, which is, let's be honest, mainly skyscrapers and high-rise buildings, you can see them just outside the village. When you enter this place, a small village with small houses, feels like stepping into a totally different city. In fact, I filmed a video walking from the main road into this area, and you can see just how quickly it changes and goes from very loud, very busy, here to total quiet. And that's actually why I'm whispering when filming this video. I'm a bit self-conscious because here you can even hear the birds. This village was founded in the 1920s as a cooperative for artists, and it's maintained much of its character and charm ever since. The houses here, you can see them behind me, they're all unique because they were individually designed, often by very arty kind of architect types. And that's a big change from most of the buildings in Moscow, which come off a plan, and they have exact copies all over the city. You can be in the east of the city, in the west of the city, you can see the same building. But what's even better about this area is that it's still home to many artists and creatives, and you can often find exhibitions or small art markets happening here. Walking through this neighborhood is a refreshing change from Moscow's urban landscape, and it's a reminder to everyone that Moscow isn't just Red Square and big Soviet housing blocks. There is some history here in a different way, which are these small houses, wooden houses in many cases, from the 1920s. The final hidden gem I want to show you is a cemetery. It's not the most famous or prestigious cemetery in Moscow. That's called Novodevichy, and it's where you can find writers Anton Chekhov, Nikolai Gogol, and former Soviet and Russian leaders like Nikita Khrushchev and Boris Yeltsin. Instead, Vidensky Cemetery is interesting because it's Moscow's foreign cemetery, especially from the 18th and 19th century. Historically, it was known as the German cemetery, and it became a sanctuary for the city's foreign communities, including Germans, French, Poles and more. And yes, that includes Brits. If you're from Europe, you come here to Moscow and you have a look around, there's a very good chance you'll see a grave written in your language or a person buried here from your country. And because of that, I find it really interesting to walk around, go down different paths and find people from the UK. So I'm going to show you a few right now. So this section in the cemetery is full of Germans. You can see one right here, an Adolf Zimmer. Another one here, a Friedrich Müller. And if you keep walking down, of course, most of them are in Russian language, although you see some which are clearly German surnames, but written in the Russian language. And then you get to another one here, also German, a Paul Grave, a Paul Grave, I'm not sure. It's another German. If we keep moving down, this huge thing here, it's more Germans. This is the Hirschman family. And you can see that at some point they got married to Russians. They actually took some Russian names. You can see Nikolai, and then they entered this Eisenstadt family, married in Eisenstadt. So, yep, that's another one. Same here, if you actually move on to the grave directly next to it, an Anna Mentin. And then you can see here it's written in German, Anna Mentin, but then next to it, their family. It must be their descendants. They write their name instead in the Russian alphabet, the Cyrillic alphabet. And you see Mentin written right there in the Cyrillic alphabet. And that's the same story for quite a lot of the Germans as you walk through here. Another one, Oscar Ruperti. So after walking through all those German graves, I've now found some British graves. This behind me here is for the Gibson family. All the people who were buried there died in the 20th century, early 20th century. And I'm not sure why, but it's got a Celtic cross. And actually right next to it, if I just move along past this tree, there is another grave with a Celtic cross right here. And this is for another family with a British name. It's the McGill family. The guy called Robert Jeffrey Allen McGill is the main guy in the middle, and there's a couple other McGills laid next to him. I'm happy to have stumbled upon a fellow compatriot of mine. This is a John Pickersgill. He is from the north of England like me. He's from York, and he was born there and he died in Moscow. He was a merchant. He opened various different shops, including in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and he had a whole family here, many of whom still remain in Moscow today. This guy here, a Henry Cord, died in Moscow. He is British, but he's not an Englishman. He's a Welshman. It says 1804 to 1859, born in Wales, died in Moscow. And here I seem to have found another British guy. This one is a Richard Bradshaw. Says he was captain in the Russian service and an English language teacher. He died in 1828, age 50 years old. So here another Brit buried in this cemetery. Here we see another country is represented. Here we see it says Kingdom of the Netherlands, and it's a man called Van der Waals who was in the Dutch army and was arrested in the Soviet Union, suspected of being a spy, but he's buried here in the cemetery. Here I found some more foreigners. These 4 graves are all Frenchmen, all from the 19th century, all in a row here. So that's another country, another nationality I found in this cemetery. And a little bit further on from the French graves you just saw is another French grave right here. This is the tomb of Philippe Desprez. He's actually relatively famous. He's one of the names I actually recognize here because he was a well-known wine merchant, and he had his own wine shop here in Moscow, and I believe it's passed through the generations. So here I found another French grave, a Louis Boissonade, and just from walking around here I get the idea that the most common nationalities you're going to find here in this cemetery are German and French. German by far the biggest. It's That's no surprise, this place was known as the German cemetery. And then after that, French, which is probably also no surprise given the 19th and 18th century links between Russia and France. And after that, you find a couple of Brits, quite a few Polish actually, but yeah, Germans and French, there are a ton of them in this graveyard. Here I found another foreign grave. This one is Polish. It's a guy called Antoni Sobocinski, and the only reason I know that pronunciation is because on this side it's actually written in Russian. And I've also found an Irishman, John Field. He was actually a famous composer who was born in Ireland, then moved to London to study, and then ended up being a composer in Russia. And here he is, buried here. As a foreigner living in Moscow for so long, this place is really interesting for me. In fact, I think I'm going to come back in the near future and film a little documentary about lots of the different foreign people who lived here in the 18th and 19th century and died and are buried here. If that's interesting for you, if you'd like to know more about foreigners in Moscow over the years, please write down in the comments, and if you like it, I'll definitely do it. So that's 8 of my hidden gems of Moscow. Beyond its iconic landmarks, its tourist-packed attractions, there are a ton of less popular spots here in Moscow that are well worth visiting. So next time I get one of your emails asking me for off the beaten track places to visit in Moscow, I'll send you this video. Thank you and bye.